So first of all, I just want to welcome you all. Thank you for joining the meeting today. This is our fourth meeting in regards to the drinking water project north of Moss Landing. And just so everyone is aware, this will be a bilingual meeting. I will be speaking in English and Spanish, and then I am co-facilitating this meeting with Kyle from Corona Environmental Consulting, and he will be speaking in English and I will be translating to Spanish. Entonces, buenas tardes a todos. Muchas gracias por participar el día de hoy. Esta es nuestra cuarta junta para el proyecto de agua potable al norte de Moss Landing. Yo y Kyle de Corona Environmental Consulting vamos a dar esta plática de hoy. Voy a darla en inglés y en español. Y Kyle va a dar su parte en inglés y yo voy a traducir para él en el español. Okay? And so just some ground rules before we get started. In an effort to make sure that the meeting runs smoothly, we will mute everyone. And everyone, if you want to unmute yourself, once we get to the comment section, press *6 if you're on the phone, or you can unmute yourself by using the mute button if you're calling in by a computer or the app. And then we will be holding time at the end of the presentation for questions, and we ask folks to be mindful of everyone that's on the call. We will have one mic, meaning that one person should speak at a time, and we ask that everyone is respectful and allows everyone on the call to speak at least once before answering multiple questions. Bueno, y para empezar, solo queremos dejarles saber que para que todo vaya bien con la plática de hoy, que vamos a poner a todos en silencio si actualmente no están en silencio. Si quieren hablar ya cuando tengamos la sección de comentarios públicos, pueden quitarse de silencio oprimiendo estrella 6. O si están hablando por la computadora o por una aplicación, simplemente pueden darle clic al botón que dice mute o silencio. Y bueno, solo vamos a tener la presentación y luego vamos a tener una sección donde vamos a escuchar sus preguntas y sus comentarios al fin de la presentación. Solo vamos a tener un micrófono y les pedimos que respeten a todos los que están hablando. Y bueno, con eso vamos a empezar con introducciones. So we'll get started with introductions. Next slide. My name is Myra Hernandez, and I am our Community Solutions Advocate with Community Water Center. Community Water Center, we are a nonprofit organization, and we have an office out of Watsonville, and I have various colleagues currently on the call with us here today, and you can see their cameras are on. Bienvenidos a todos. Mi nombre es Myra Hernández. Soy nuestra asesora de soluciones comunitarias con el Centro Comunitario por el Agua. Somos una organización sin fines de lucro y tenemos una oficina en Watsonville, y aquí también tenemos unos colegas que trabajan conmigo, los pueden ver, tienen sus cámaras prendidas, y ahora le voy a pasar la palabra a Kyle para que se introduzca y a su equipo también. So now give the mic to Kyle so he can introduce himself and Corona Environmental Consulting.
Thanks, Myra. My name is Kyle Shimabuku, and I'm a water process engineer with Corona Environmental Consulting. We're a company that specializes on water treatment processes and estimating costs involved with implementing various water treatment processes.
Entonces, su nombre es Kyle, él trabaja para Corona Environmental Consulting y es un ingeniero de procesos de agua, y se enfocan en cosas de sistemas de tratamiento para el agua y cosas así. Next slide. We're gonna start with the introductions, which we already did. Then we're going to talk about project background, where we will be sharing more about why this project is coming to your community and why it's important. Then we'll talk about the project goals, where we'll share more on what we're trying to accomplish with this project. Then Kyle will lead on sharing more specifics of the findings of the study. He'll give an overview of the alternatives. Then we'll discuss a little bit more about the cost analysis that was done. And at the end of the presentation, we have some community questions that have been brought up, and we have answers to those questions. And then we'll open it up to the community feedback. Entonces, vamos a platicar un poco más sobre los antecedentes del proyecto y las metas del proyecto. Vamos a dejarles saber qué estamos tratando de cumplir con este proyecto. Y luego Kyle va a platicar un poco más del resumen de las alternativas y qué se encontró en el estudio. Y luego vamos a terminar con unas preguntas que ustedes nos hicieron, que ya tenemos las respuestas. Y al final queremos escuchar sus opiniones y sus preguntas que tengan al respecto de lo que se va a platicar hoy. All right, so now we can go to project background. So just wanted to share a quick high-level overview of this project. So we received funding from the state to hire professional consultants to conduct this study, mainly because we found that there were water quality issues in the community. Entonces, nosotros recibimos fondos del Estado para contratar a unos profesionales para que hicieran este estudio, porque encontramos que habían problemas con la calidad del agua en la comunidad. Entonces, ese mapa que pueden ver allí enseña el área que va a ser cubierta por el proyecto y incluye los hogares que están por las calles de Bluff, Jensen, Tracton, Giberson y algunas partes de Struve Road. And so, as you all can see, the map shows the area that is being covered by this project, and it includes households on Bluff, Jensen, Tracton, Giberson, and some parts of Struve Road as well. And you can also see some graphs that show the high levels of both nitrate and 1,2,3-trichloropropane that are above health standards. So that's the main reason why we are conducting this study, to find solutions, long-term solutions, to resolve the issues with high-level contamination. Next slide. All right, and so now going into project goals, the goal of this project is really to study the long-term solutions to supply safe drinking water to approximately 88 households in the area. Entonces, la meta es estudiar las soluciones a largo plazo para proveer agua sana y limpia a aproximadamente 88 hogares que están en su área. Otras metas pues son evaluar las soluciones de agua potable a largo plazo, involucrarlos a todos ustedes, miembros de la comunidad, y facilitar la comunicación entre miembros de la comunidad, tomadores de decisiones y otros interesados para avanzar las soluciones a largo plazo. Y pues la meta más importante es seleccionar una solución preferida y gestionar una beca de la Mesa Estatal de Agua para poder implementar la solución a largo plazo. So the project goals are really to engage you all because we want this project to be community driven. And with that, we want to facilitate communication between community members, decision makers, and other stakeholders to really advance the long-term solution options. And then the most important project goal is to select a preferred alternative and seek grant funding from the State Water Board to be able to implement a long-term solution. Next slide. Bueno, well, now I'll pass it over to Kyle to take it from here. Ahora le voy a dar la palabra a Kyle, donde nos va a platicar un poco más del resumen de las alternativas.
Thank you, Myra. So as Myra said, the goal of this project is to develop a long-term solution to address the water quality issues in your community. And so there were 5 different options or alternatives that were considered. And the first alternative that's shown is connecting to the Pajaro Sunny Mesa Community Services District system. And that is our recommended alternative.
Bueno, entonces lo que dijo Kyle es que se consideraron 5 alternativas para este estudio y la recomendación o la alternativa que están recomendando es la consolidación física con un sistema de agua establecido que lo maneja y lo opera Pájaro Sunny Mesa CST.
There's 3 main reasons why this is the recommended option. First, because funding that will come from the state will likely only be available for this option. It's also the most reliable and permanent solution, and the cost to the community will be relatively low.
Entonces, hay 3 razones por la cual se está recomendando esta alternativa. La primera es que es una opción confiable y también tendrá una fuente de respaldo y el Estado ve la consolidación física como la opción más confiable.
If for some reason this first alternative is not feasible, then a new community water system would be our second alternative that we would recommend. And the 3 other alternatives listed here would not be recommended. So we would not recommend any of these alternatives.
Si por alguna razón la primera opción no es viable, entonces la segunda recomendación sería hacer un nuevo sistema comunitario de agua entubada. Y las 3 opciones después no son recomendables.
So now I will go into detail into more on each of these alternatives. And so like I mentioned on the previous slide, the recommended alternative is physical consolidation with an established water system.
Ahora va a platicar un poco más en detalle sobre las opciones. Como ya lo dijo, la consolidación física, que sería conectarse al proyecto de Springfield, operado por Pájaro Sunny Mesa CST, es la opción que están recomendando.
And so what physical consolidation means here is connecting to the Springfield project, which will be owned and operated by the Pajaro Sunny Mesa Community Services District.
Entonces, la consolidación física implica conectar al sistema de Springfield, que se puede ver aquí con estas tuberías.
As you can see here in the map, the area that shows the red lines, which represent underground pipelines along roadways, those red lines are the Springfield project that's currently being installed or pursued.
Como pueden ver en el mapa, hay líneas rojas. Esa es la tubería que es parte del proyecto de Springfield.
So connecting to the Springfield project would involve connecting all of the households in the project area with these various lines that represent pipelines that are buried underground along roadways.
Entonces, lo que implicaría esta opción sería conectar a todas las tuberías, las azules y las grises, a las tuberías rojas.
So the first reason why we recommend this alternative is because it's reliable and will likely be able to provide safe drinking water right away and into the future.
Entonces, la primera razón por la cual están recomendando esta opción es porque es confiable y va a poder suministrar agua potable segura a largo plazo.
It would be reliable because it would be operated by an experienced utility, the Pajaro Sunny Mesa CSD, and the facilities would be shared with the existing system.
Y también sería confiable porque el sistema sería administrado por Pájaros Animesa CST, que es un proveedor de agua ya con mucha experiencia, y utilizaría el agua de Springfield, que actualmente es una fuente de alta calidad.
The water that would come from the system would also utilize the well that the Springfield project currently has developed, which produces high quality water, and a second backup source of water would also be developed by developing an additional community scale well.
Y además de tener la fuente de agua de Springfield, también tendrá una fuente de respaldo.
Water quality would also continue to be monitored and reported to the state, which would ensure high quality water into the future.
Y también la calidad del agua se monitorea y sería reportada al Estado, que significa que va a tener una fuente de alta calidad de agua en el futuro.
State funding is also likely to be available for all of the community or public infrastructure. And the state of California has communicated that this would likely be the only option they would be willing to fund.
Hay financiamiento del Estado con becas estatales, y el Estado considera que esta opción es la más viable y es probable que sea la única opción que el Estado financie.
The other two reasons we recommend this option is because community members would only pay a water bill and would not have to worry about paying for ongoing operations and maintenance. And this option also serves everyone in the community.
Entonces, las otras razones por las cuales se recomienda esta opción es, primero, que los miembros de la comunidad solo van a tener que pagar una factura de agua mensual y no necesitan preocuparse de la operación y el mantenimiento del sistema. Y es una opción que sirve a todas las casas en la comunidad.
One of the challenges is that there's high initial construction costs, but most, if not all, of these costs would be covered by the state.
Uno de los desafíos que tiene esta opción son los costos iniciales de construcción. Son muy altos, pero lo bueno es que creemos que el Estado puede pagar por esos costos iniciales.
And then another challenge is property owners' ability to pay will likely be considered when determining if state funding is available to pay for work performed on private property, like installing a lateral pipe after the water meter on private property.
Y luego otro desafío sería la capacidad de pago del propietario. Se va a considerar al determinar el nivel de financiamiento del Estado para las tuberías laterales después de los medidores o los gastos de la propiedad privada.
So if for some reason physical consolidation or connecting to the Springfield project cannot be pursued because it's determined to be infeasible, like if the timeline took too long, we would recommend as a second choice a new community water system.
Si por alguna razón la primera opción no es viable, entonces se recomienda esta segunda alternativa, que sería construir un nuevo sistema comunitario de agua entubada.
Developing a new community water system would mean developing much of the infrastructure we saw on the last page, like the similar pipelines, but it would also involve developing two new domestic water sources, which would be two community scale wells.
El construir un nuevo sistema comunitario de agua entubada sería un poco más complicado porque se tuviera que hacer toda la infraestructura que pueden ver en la imagen del mapa allí. Eh, entonces sería más difícil y para hacer esta segunda opción.
Um, Also similar to physical consolidation option or connecting to the Springfield project is that a experienced water utility would likely be able to operate this system, and water quality would also be monitored and reported to the state.
Igual que la primera opción, este sistema comunitario o esta segunda opción también sería operada por un sistema que ya tiene experiencia y la calidad de agua sería monitoreada y reportada al Estado al igual.
Grant funding may also be available for community infrastructure with this alternative, but a drawback is it's only likely to be eligible for state funding if physical consolidation is considered not feasible.
Y otro beneficio es que igual el Estado puede financiar esta opción, pero solamente si la primera opción no es viable.
The reason why is because the state of California is trying to avoid the formation of small water systems and instead wants to consolidate or connect small systems into larger systems.
Y la razón siendo que el Estado quiere evitar construir sistemas comunitarios pequeños, ellos quieren conectar a los sistemas pequeños a sistemas más grandes porque son más confiables.
The same challenges for physical consolidation are also challenges for this option, like high initial construction costs, and considerations of a property owner's ability to pay for work performed on private property.
Y los desafíos para esta opción son los iguales que la última opción. Los costos iniciales de la construcción son muy altos y la capacidad de pago del propietario se va a considerar a determinar el nivel de financiamiento que puede dar el Estado.
The last challenge I'll mention is that if the Pajaro Sunny Mesa Community Services District determines they cannot operate this system, it may be difficult to develop a new water utility to operate the system.
Y el último desafío que va a mencionar es que si por alguna razón Pájaro Sunny Mesa no puede operar este sistema, entonces sería un poco más difícil encontrar a otra agencia que lo haga o crear otra agencia que lo haga.
So the other three alternatives we considered all involved using domestic wells, and neither or none of these alternatives are recommended.
Entonces, las otras opciones que se consideraron fueron al nivel del pozo privado y ninguna de esas opciones están siendo recomendadas.
The first alternative we considered for domestic well supply alternatives is replacing existing private wells, which involves drilling a new well that is likely to produce better quality water.
La primera alternativa que nos está recomendando es la de reemplazar pozos existentes con pozos nuevos y mejor construidos que probablemente pudieran producir una mejor calidad de agua.
Another alternative we considered is wellhead treatment, and this involves installing a treatment system at the well, a private well or a well shared by multiple households, and this treatment system could remove all contaminants.
La segunda opción sería tratar el agua donde sale del pozo y lo que esto implica, se instalarían sistemas de tratamiento que pueden reducir contaminantes a niveles seguros y que tratarían todo el agua producida desde el pozo para uno o más hogares.
Another option we also considered was point of entry treatment, which involves a treatment system just at the entrance of piped of water entering a household, as well as point of use treatment, which is usually installed right where water is consumed, like under a sink.
Luego, la última opción que se consideró es el tratamiento de punto de entrada o punto de uso, que sería, el punto de entrada sería un sistema de tratamiento que se pone afuera de la casa y el de punto de uso sería dentro de la casa como debajo del fregadero.
Point of entry, point of use treatment is different than wellhead treatment because wellhead treatment treats all water, including irrigation water, whereas point of use, point of entry treatment only treats water that enters the house.
El tratamiento del agua donde sale del pozo es diferente al punto de uso o punto de entrada, porque el tratamiento de donde sale el agua del pozo trataría toda el agua, incluyendo el agua para irrigar las plantas. Pero el punto de uso y punto de entrada solo es para contaminantes específicos y sería de los lugares donde estén los tratamientos como debajo del fregadero.
The reason why we don't recommend either or any of these three alternatives is because it's difficult and will be unlikely to get state funding.
Y la razón por la cual no están recomendando estas tres opciones es porque sería muy difícil obtener becas estatales para cubrir los costos de estas alternativas.
We also do not recommend these alternatives because there are long-term reliability concerns. And while they could address water quality issues in the near term, they may not in future years.
Y otra razón por la cual no se están recomendando es porque a largo plazo puede que no dé agua confiable, entonces por eso no se está recomendando.
We also don't recommend point of use, point of entry treatment and well replacement because both of these alternatives will not address issues for all households in the project area.
Y tampoco se están recomendando porque estas tres opciones no serían viables para todos los hogares en el área del proyecto.
And last, we don't recommend wellhead treatment because this was found to be by far the most expensive option.
Y por último, no recomiendan tratar el agua donde sale del pozo debido a que tiene un costo muy alto comparado a todas las otras opciones.
So now we'll look at a summary of our cost analysis and consider other cost considerations.
Ahora vamos a ver un resumen de los costos que se hizo.
One of the first cost considerations is whether or not an alternative will be eligible for grant funding. And so that's what we're looking at here in this table is which aspects of projects could be eligible for grant funding.
Sorry, I was messaging with someone that's having issues getting or listening to the presentation. Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Yo lo puedo traducir. I can translate. El primer cosa que estamos evaluando es si va a haber becas estatales para que puedan financiar esta parte del proyecto. Eso es la primera cosa que están considerando de parte de su evaluación.
one more item I'd like to mention before I continue on this table is that you may have received presentation materials in the mail earlier this week. And so this is slide 16 if you have those presentation materials that were mailed.
Si han recibido durante la semana, creo que el miércoles llegó un paquete de información y parte de ese paquete de información son los dispositivos de esta presentación y este dispositivo es el número 16. Entonces, si quiere leer con nosotros, es el número 16, ahí en la información que hemos mandado al Serpus.
So when considering the availability of grant funding from the state will fund some alternatives regardless of households' ability to pay.
En considerando las opciones de financiamiento del Estado, el Estado va a financiar algunas opciones independientemente del hogar y su capacidad para pagar.
So in the case of physical consolidation, which means connecting to the Springfield project, that would be operated by the Pajero Sunny Mesa Community Services District, all public infrastructure is likely to be eligible for grant funding, regardless or not dependent on households' ability to pay.
En el caso de consolidación física, que sería operado por Paro San y Mesa, toda la infraestructura pública sería cubierta con fondos estatales.
Such public infrastructure includes things like developing a new community scale well and also installing all pipelines that will go underground along roadways.
Y la infraestructura pública sería construir un pozo de agua nuevo y instalar tubería debajo o tubería subterránea, pues.
Similarly, if physical consolidation or connecting to the Springfield project is considered to be infeasible and a new community water system was developed, the public infrastructure for that community water system would also be grant funded and it wouldn't depend on households' ability to pay.
Y otra vez, si por alguna razón la primera opción no es viable, un nuevo sistema comunitario de agua entubada sería la segunda opción y lo mismo aplica. La infraestructura pública sería cubierta por fondos estatales y no depende de la habilidad de pagar de los propietarios.
As we mentioned on previous slides, it is unlikely that grant funding would be available for these three alternatives, and it's more certain that it will not be available for those who are able to pay for such alternatives.
Y como ya lo platicamos anteriormente, para las tres opciones de aquí abajo, no es probable conseguir becas estatales y menos si alguien tiene la habilidad de poder pagar por esos tratamientos.
So there may also be grant funding that can be available to households that's dependent on their ability to pay.
Y también va a haber fondos que van a estar disponibles, pero esos están, dependen de la capacidad de pago de los propietarios.
Such funding that's dependent on households' ability to pay for physical consolidation or connecting to the Springfield project would include things like a lateral developed on private property and well destruction, or if a household wants to keep their well, funding could be available for a lateral and a backflow preventer.
Y bueno, hay los costos que están bajo esta sección serían trabajo en propiedad privada, que serían los laterales, más los dispositivos de prevención de reflujo, o los laterales más la destrucción del pozo.
But again, I just want to make it clear that all funding that would be available to perform work on private property is dependent on households' ability to pay.
Y para clarificar otra vez, los fondos que serían disponibles para cubrir estos costos dependerían de la capacidad de poder pagar del propietario.
As mentioned earlier, grant funding for household solutions is unlikely if piped supply solutions are feasible. So physical consolidation is feasible, or a new community water system is feasible if physical consolidation is determined not to be feasible. That is the only way that these solutions might be able to be grant funded.
Y como ya lo platicamos, la única manera que estas tres opciones pueden ser elegibles para fondos estatales es solo si la primera opción de consolidación física o de un nuevo sistema comunitario de agua entubada no son viables. Si sí son viables, entonces no habrá fondos estatales para cubrir esas tres opciones.
So if piped water supply is determined to not be feasible, grants may be available for these alternatives, but a third-party technical assistance provider would be required to administer these projects.
Entonces, otra vez, si las primeras dos opciones no son viables, puede que haya becas estatales, pero se necesitaría de un proveedor de asistencia técnica para administrar el proyecto de esos fondos.
So regardless of what solution is pursued, households are likely to have to pay for monthly water bills in the case of the community piped water solutions, or ongoing operations and maintenance costs for the solutions involving using existing wells.
Al considerar las diferentes opciones, van a haber pagos que se tienen que dar por cada hogar. Si las primeras dos opciones se eligen, entonces cada hogar va a tener una factura mensual que se le va a pagar a Pájaros Animesa. Pero si se eligen alguna de las otras tres opciones, entonces los hogares van a tener costos continuos para la operación y el mantenimiento de los sistemas de tratamiento.
And just to clarify, I don't think I said that quite right. Ongoing costs would need to be paid for by each household for all three of these alternatives that involve domestic wells.
Entonces, para clarificar otra vez, cada hogar sería responsable por los costos continuos por esas tres opciones.
Okay, so now this next slide is slide number 14 in the presentation materials that were mailed out to many of you earlier in the week.
Esta es la dispositiva número 14 que deben de tener en frente de ustedes de los materiales que les mandamos.
So what we see here are capital costs, which mean the initial costs for any alternative. And then we also see a column for monthly costs or operation and maintenance costs.
Entonces, lo que vemos en esta tabla primero son los costos iniciales por hogar y luego los costos de operación y mantenimiento mensuales por hogar.
For our recommended alternative, physical consolidation or connecting to the Springfield project that would be managed and operated by the Pájaro Sunny Mesa CSD, we see two different costs listed.
Entonces, para la primera opción que se está recomendando, que sería conectar al sistema de Springfield, hay dos costos iniciales que se ven aquí.
The first cost of $144,000 involves all work to be performed off of private property. So this includes things like developing new community wells and installing pipelines along public roadways.
El primer costo de $144,000 incluye todos los costos asociados con cualquier trabajo que no se realice en propiedad privada.
So all of these costs are anticipated to be grant funded, and they would not depend on a household's ability to pay. So they would be covered for the entire community.
Entonces, este costo se anticipa que va a ser cubierto por fondos estatales y la comunidad no se tiene que preocupar por pagar estos costos.
The second cost of $32,000, this involves all costs that would involve work on private property. And this would get grant funding potentially, but it depends on a household's ability to pay.
Y luego los $32,000 serían para la línea de servicio en la propiedad privada y este costo depende de la capacidad de pagar del propietario.
This cost includes installing a new service line on private property, so from a water meter to a household, as well as destructing an existing private well.
Y este costo incluye la destrucción del pozo y el costo para poner una nueva línea de servicio en la propiedad.
These costs could be different if instead you installed your own service line connecting to the water meter, or instead of destroyed your existing well, installed a backflow preventer to make sure well water used for irrigation does not mix with the community provided water from the Consolidation project.
Este costo puede ser diferente si ustedes como propietarios eligen poner la línea de servicio ustedes mismos o también si deciden que quieren quedarse con su pozo privado, tienen que instalar un dispositivo de reflujo para que no se mezcle el agua del pozo con el agua del sistema comunitario.
There is a similar cost breakdown for a new community water system that shows initial costs that would be covered by the state for all households, and then an additional cost that would only be covered by the state depending on a household's ability to pay.
Y luego también se enseña aquí los costos para la segunda opción, que sería para un nuevo sistema comunitario de agua entubada. La primera cifra de $22,000 sería cubierta por fondos estatales y luego lo mismo aplica para lo de 32,000, que depende de la capacidad de pagar del propietario.
All of these costs now listed for the domestic well solutions are unlikely to receive grant funding if physical consolidation is deemed to be feasible. But if these options are pursued, they would only be grant funded for households depending on their ability to pay.
Y los costos que se ven aquí en amarillo, que tienen el círculo rojo, no pueden obtener fondos estatales si las primeras dos opciones son viables. Pero si se consideran que no son viables, entonces esos costos serían elegibles para becas estatales, pero depende de la capacidad de pago del propietario.
So next we'll look at monthly O&M costs. And so these are costs that would not be funded by the state and would most likely need to be paid for by households.
Y ahora vamos a ver los costos de operación y mantenimiento mensuales. Estos costos no serían elegibles para fondos estatales y se tendrían que pagar por los hogares.
So we can see there's a range of costs here on this table. And so on the next slide, we'll look at a few different estimates of how these costs can vary.
Y como pueden ver, esta tabla que está de color rojo tiene un rango de costos. Y en la próxima diapositiva vamos a ver más ejemplos de sus costos.
So the monthly water bill for these piped water or community water solutions is largely dependent on how much water is consumed by a household per month.
Entonces, la factura mensual para este sistema se depende del uso del agua del hogar.
So for instance, the Sunny Mesa system, which is nearby in 2019 and 2020, found that on average, households used 281 gallons of water per day.
Entonces, el sistema de Sunny Mesa, que está cerca de la comunidad, en el 2019 y en el 2020, tienen un promedio de uso de 281 galones al día por hogar.
This corresponded to a monthly water bill of $91 based on Pajaro Sunny Mesa's 2021 water rates.
Y el uso de 281 galones salió a una factura mensual de $91.
The Sunny Mesa water system also provided water use levels and water bills for 4 individual households.
El sistema de Sunny Mesa nos dio 4 ejemplos del uso del agua para 4 hogares distintos.
So on average in 2020, these households paid $116 a month, $88 a month, $104 a month, and $23 a month.
Entonces, en promedio, en el año 2020, estos 4 hogares pagaron $116 al mes, $88 al mes, $104 al mes y $23 al mes.
And you can see this depends on how much water they used. So water was used at different levels depending on if landscaping was present and how many people were living in the household.
Y el costo depende de cuántos galones usaron y también cuántos miembros de la familia había y si tenían un jardín grande o pequeño.
The last thing I'll say is that this material is provided on slide 15 in the materials that should have been mailed out to you earlier in the week.
Y les queremos dejar saber que esta información debe de estar en la diapositiva número 15 en los materiales que les mandamos esta semana.
So really quick, there's much more details in the project report available on Community Water Center's website about this table. But I'll let you translate, sorry.
No worries. Entonces, para esta tabla vamos a hablar un poco más de lo que los criterios que se consideraron.
But in addition to the criteria we discussed previously, there was additional criteria that was considered, and we ranked each alternative as either favorable, which corresponds to green, somewhat favorable, which corresponds to yellow, less favorable, which corresponds to orange, or not favorable, corresponding to red.
Entonces, los diferentes criterios que se consideraron están en el círculo rojo y de la manera que funciona esta tabla es que el verde significa que es una opción favorable basado en los criterios. Si es amarillo, es un poco favorable. Si es anaranjado, es menos favorable. Y si es rojo, no es favorable.
And it can be seen that for all of the domestic well options, there's lots of red or orange, suggesting these are not favorable alternatives.
Y como pueden ver, en las tres opciones que no se están recomendando, hay mucho rojo, amarillo y anaranjado, que significa que no son opciones recomendables basado en esos criterios.
Whereas for our recommended alternative, physical consolidation with the Springfield project, there's lots of green and yellow.
Y para las opciones que sí se están recomendando, hay mucho verde y amarillo.
Corona Environmental Consulting also considered combinations of alternatives, like combining physical consolidation at some households with wellhead treatment at other households.
Corona Environmental Consulting también consideró las combinaciones de consolidación físico con un nuevo sistema comunitario de agua entubado con otras soluciones las otras soluciones no recomendadas.
These combination alternatives were found to not be cost effective, so we do not recommend combining alternatives together.
Y estas combinaciones no son económicas y por eso no se recomienda la combinación.
Providing no intervention at households where their wells are currently meeting water quality standards was also considered and found to reduce costs.
Y también se vio que si no hay ninguna intervención en los hogares que actualmente cumplen los estándares de calidad del agua, eso podría reducir los costos del proyecto.
However, at many of these wells, there was incomplete water quality data, and so it still needs to be confirmed if these wells were actually meeting water quality standards.
Pero no tenemos todos los datos de la calidad de agua en todas las casas, entonces puede que se empeore la calidad del agua en el futuro.
And we do not recommend this option because water qualities at those houses may deteriorate in the future.
Y bueno, otra vez no se recomienda porque puede empeorar la calidad de agua en el futuro.
So in conclusion, based off Corona Environmental Consulting's analysis, we recommend, pending more community input, that the project pursue physical consolidation or connecting to the Springfield project operated by the Pajaro Sunny Mesa Community Services District.
Entonces, en conclusión, la recomendación de Corona Environmental Consulting, pendiente de más retroalimentación comunitaria, la primera es la consolidación física con el sistema de Springfield operado por Pajaro Sunny Mesa CSD.
And if for some reason that alternative cannot be pursued, for instance, because of a delayed timeline, then our second choice alternative could be pursued, which is the new community water system.
Y si por alguna razón esa primera opción no es viable, entonces la segunda recomendación sería construir un nuevo sistema comunitario de agua entubada.
So before continuing, I just want to see if anyone else from Community Water Center or Corona Environmental Consulting would like to add anything to what we've presented.
Y bueno, ahorita vamos a tomar una pausa para ver si alguien más tiene algo que agregar. But Kyle, I think due to time constraints, we can move forward. Entonces vamos a seguir porque estamos un poco atrasados.
So really quick, this is what a potential timeline could look like for implementing either of the recommended alternatives. It would involve things like an initial design of 30% and then more detailed designs later in 2024.
Entonces, este es un ejemplo de la línea de tiempo para implementar la recomendación. Entonces, lo primero sería obtener un diseño de la consolidación física del 30% en el 2022 y luego el 60 y el 90 y el 100% en el 2024.
Also applying for grant funding and also performing permitting tasks and planning tasks that would take at least 4 years, up to 2025.
Y luego también aplicar para obtener financiamiento, adquirir terreno y obtener permisos de planificación. Eso tomaría aproximadamente 4 años.
And then in 2026, a new community well could be constructed and tested to make sure it's safe. And then pipeline could be installed as well as final permitting in 2027.
Y en el 2027 podríamos obtener un permiso para construir el nuevo pozo de respaldo y en el 2027 ya podríamos obtener el permiso para construir las tuberías y obtener otros permisos finales del condado y de la Mesa Estatal del Agua. All right. Thank you, Kyle, for the presentation. Now we're going to move on to review two community questions that were frequently asked. Entonces, muchas gracias a Kyle por la presentación. Ahora vamos a repasar dos preguntas que obtuvimos frecuentemente. Entonces, la primera pregunta es, so the first question is, can I continue to use my well and connect to the piped water system? So the answer is yes. However, a backflow preventer must be installed, and it has an estimated cost of $2,340, and it needs to be inspected yearly for approximately a cost of $90, and your plumbing must be modified to separate water from the well and water from the water system. And so we are investigating to what extent these costs could be grant funded. So that's to be determined. And then the last point here is that you may need to destroy the well eventually due to age or seawater intrusion, and grants may not be available to destroy wells in the future. And that has a cost of approximately $24,000. Entonces, la primera pregunta es, ¿puedo seguir usando mi pozo y también conectarme al sistema de agua entubada? Y la respuesta es sí, pero hay que instalar un dispositivo antirreflujo que tiene un costo estimado de $2,340 y se tiene que inspeccionar anualmente, que tiene otro costo aproximadamente de $90 al año. Y se tendrá que modificar su plomería para separar el agua del pozo del agua del sistema público. Y actualmente estamos averiguando si estos costos van a ser financiados con becas estatales. Y también es posible que tendrán que destruir su pozo en el futuro por la edad o por la intrusión marina, y no se sabe si habrá becas para el costo para destruir el pozo en el futuro. Y eso tiene un costo estimado de $24,000. And then we'll go to the next question, which is, can households opt out initially and connect to the Springfield water system later? So the answer is yes, but the water provider would need to verify that there's sufficient supply available before connecting additional households. And after the project ends, grant funding will not be available for connection fees and construction charges that are made by Pájaros Animes CSD, which are estimated at approximately $17,900. And that cost would be waived for all households connecting initially. And then the last point is that work on private property, which includes the lateral pipe and wall destruction or backflow preventer, could be funded during the project timeline, but it is initially based on ability to pay to be able to receive that funding. Entonces, la segunda pregunta es que si los hogares pueden optar no conectarse inicialmente y conectarse al sistema de Springfield más tarde. Y la respuesta es sí, pero el proveedor de agua necesitaría averiguar si hay suficiente agua disponible antes de conectar a hogares adicionales. Y después de que termine el proyecto, las becas no van a estar disponibles para cubrir los costos de la conexión y construcción que se cobran por Pájaros Animes CSD, los cuales se estiman costar entre $17,900. Y ese monto no se aplicaría a los hogares que se conecten inicialmente. Y el último punto aquí es que el trabajo que se haga en la propiedad privada, que incluye la tubería lateral y destrucción del pozo o instalar un dispositivo antirreflujo, puede ser financiado por el Estado mientras que estemos en el proyecto, pero después, en un futuro, bueno, puede ser elegible para fondos estatales basado en la capacidad de pago del propietario, pero después de que se acabe el proyecto, no. Bueno, entonces esas eran las dos preguntas más frecuentes. So those were the two questions that we commonly were hearing from the community. And I hope that answers some questions. And now we will, before we go into community questions or comments, just wanted to share the timeline for the next community meeting. So we will be holding the last community meeting for this project sometime in November, where we will present on the final report. Entonces, antes de continuar con los comentarios y las preguntas de ustedes, solo les queremos dejar saber que la siguiente plática comunitaria para este proyecto se llevará a cabo en noviembre y vamos a platicar un poco más sobre el reporte final de este proyecto. Next slide. And so now we're at the point in the meeting where we ask for your input. Your opinion and input are really important to the success of the project. We would like to hear all your questions, comments, and concerns to ensure that the solutions meet your needs and your concerns. Entonces ya llegamos a la parte de la junta donde vamos a escuchar de sus opiniones y sus preguntas, ya que es importante escuchar qué preguntas o dudas tengan de este proyecto, porque queremos asegurarnos que las soluciones atiendan a sus necesidades y sus preocupaciones. And so we'll open it up to the public. You can either unmute yourself or type a question in the chat. And if for some reason you have to leave, you can always send me your questions, comments, and concerns via text, or you can call me at 831-500-2125, or you can email me at Myra Hernandez or myra.hernandez@communitywatercenter.org. Y bueno, por si alguna razón se tienen que ir, siempre me pueden mandar un mensaje o un correo, o me pueden llamar al 831-500-2125, o me pueden mandar un correo electrónico a myra.hernandez@communitywatercenter.org. And so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself. Si alguien tiene alguna pregunta o un comentario sobre lo que se acaba de presentar, por favor, quítense de silencio. Pueden hacerlo con estrella 6 o con el botón de silencio o de mute.
This is Beverly Weekly. I know I'm the squeaky wheel here. I have too many questions and concerns that would take up the rest of the time. So I'd like to see whoever else has questions first, and then I could always email my questions to you. One of the main ones I do have is, what is the deadline when we have to decide? You guys aren't even, this won't even, I mean, I'll be like retirement age before this even comes into fruition. And I could be dead by then. I mean, you know, I could be killed tomorrow by a wrong way driver or something. So, I mean, I just don't see this. It's just way too far out for us to make any decisions. So when are you going to make us decide on which way we need to go?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Thanks, Bev. John, do you want to try to answer that?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. Do you want to translate first, Myra?
Oh, yes. Beverly preguntó, o bueno, dijo que tenía muchas preguntas sobre lo que se presentó y que nos va a mandar un correo con las preguntas para dejar que otros hagan sus preguntas o den sus comentarios. Pero una de las preguntas principales que tiene es que ¿cuándo se va a determinar o cuándo se va a decidir qué opción van a obtener? Porque siente que va a tomar mucho tiempo ya cuando tengan una solución, ya va a estar retirada. Entonces, quiere saber cuándo se va a decidir cuál solución se va a implementar.
So thanks, Bev, for that question. I think it's a really good question, and when we look at that timeline, it looks like a lot of years. But I think Community Water Center's goal is to work with community members as soon as possible to start the next steps of this project. So out of the final report will come a recommendation, and then part of getting funding for this project will be likely for community members and property owners to show interest. If the recommended option based on community feedback is connecting to the Springfield system, next steps would likely be for property owners and community members to express their interest for that solution, to push the state to move forward with funding the next
step. Can I interrupt you here? We've already expressed interest. No, I'm asking you, what is the deadline when we must, what is the ultimate deadline when we have to decide and we can't have no turning back to have your pipeline come down our road, and then we have no turning back to accept all your expenses? Because a lot of us may not have the ability maybe to pay at this time, but by the time I retire, I might not have that. So I want to know what the deadline is where we have to accept your project. And I do not want to destroy my well either way, but when is the deadline when we have to accept this project where we have to connect to that pipeline?
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Myra, do you want to translate now? And then I can answer the second part.
Yes, I will translate. So lo que dijo John es que básicamente parece que la línea de tiempo va a tomar mucho tiempo para implementar el proyecto, pero nosotros estamos tratando de trabajar y comunicarnos con todos ustedes en la comunidad para poder implementar este proyecto lo más pronto posible. Y luego Beth contestó que pues ella ya ha expresado que está interesada y quiere saber cuándo va a ser la fecha final, que ya no va, que va a tener que tomar la decisión de si quiere conectar su casa al sistema entubado, o porque, o sea, actualmente a lo mejor ahorita sí va a tener la capacidad de pagar, pero en unos años a lo mejor no. Entonces, ¿cuándo va a ser la fecha final para tener que aceptar el proyecto?
Okay, thanks. So one clarification is that the next step to committing would be to sign a request to serve letter, which would say you're requesting that the water utility Pajaro Sunny Mesa serve you water, and that could be a step that comes pretty soon, before all of this construction and permitting happens. I don't know, Heather, do you know how soon that would happen, that one could sign a request to serve letter?
Yes, so this is Heather Lucas, Community Water Center. In talking with the State Water Board, I think, Bev, to your question, they want to see interest, from the community in writing in the form of a request to serve letter to, as John mentioned, the Pajaro Sunny Mesa Community Service District. And they want to see that before they're going to invest in paying for, engineering design and all of these other planning and permitting steps that were discussed today. So the state wants to see that. Now, we have said, well, the community wants to know what they're going to have to pay first. And so what we will likely be able to do is have on the request to serve letter, community members can say, Dear Pajaro Sunny Mesa CSD, we request to be connected to your water system. We understand that we would become ratepayers. And also, if the condition is this project would need to be funded by grant funding from the state. So we can put that caveat in there. So in case there isn't funding that comes through, no one will be held to connecting. But they want to see that interest, and that can also change the scope of the project. If community members from a certain area are not interested, or they're not willing to send that request to serve letter, it's possible that the pipeline will not go in that part of the geographic area. So I think there's, just to reiterate, there's two next steps that are really important. Number one is what's the date that we're requesting feedback on this report? October 5th?
October 8th.
8th. Yeah, so we're requesting, any feedback on this draft report by October 8th, and then it'll be revised and included in the final report. So I think that's a key deadline. And then the second key deadline will be these requests to serve letters, but we can't do that step until the preferred option is selected, and community members need to weigh in on that. So I would encourage everyone, if you support the recommended alternative, or if you have questions about it, or if you're interested in a different one, we want to make sure we get that feedback now, and then we'll be following up with the next step.
So then, excuse me, so I'm on an easement of a road. So if the first person on the easement decides that she wants nothing to do with it, the second person decides maybe, and then the third person decides maybe, and I decide I want to go in with it. So then what happens? So if the first person on my easement where you're gonna put the pipeline down my road decides she doesn't want to have anything to do with it, you're gonna stop right there. Is that what I understand?
So before we answer the question, Bev, let me just translate that quickly. Entonces, lo que Heather y John respondieron es que básicamente hemos estado hablando con el Estado y el Estado quiere ver que haya interés de la comunidad, y una forma de enseñar ese interés es con una carta donde uno dice que quiere ser parte del proyecto. Y entonces hay dos cosas importantes que van a pasar en estos días. Lo primero es que necesitamos obtener su retroalimentación sobre el proyecto para ver si sí les gustaron las recomendaciones o no. Y necesitamos tener esos comentarios antes del 8 de octubre. Y luego vamos a ver lo de las cartas de servicio, pero no podemos hacer eso hasta que no elijan una opción para implementar. Y ahorita Bev preguntó que, bueno, ella actualmente en su situación vive en una calle donde comparte una calle de tierra, y si las otras dos casas deciden no participar y ella sí quiere, entonces, ¿qué va a pasar?
I think I can try to give a first answer to that, Bev, but I think that would be something we'd have to look at with the state and see how many people in your area want to participate, and based on that, whether the state will fund that area. But in general, the more people who want to participate and the more people we can get on board, the more likely it is that the state will provide full funding. I don't know, Heather, if you have anything to add.
No, I don't. I think it's very true. I think we'll work. We'll work to try to get as many people as possible in your area and in the whole project area. Make sure they're aware of the project and know about that option. And definitely we want the project to benefit as many people as possible. But given the analysis that Corona Environmental Consulting did that was shared today and that's in the draft report, I think it also shows that it breaks this down a little bit more, and we can share that more with you one-on-one for your area.
Well, I think you're cutting this really short, and I'm really sorry for the other people, but I know that they have a lot of other questions too on this line. This is Bev again. You need to have a whole different meeting just for our questions and our concerns. Another one would be, so say if I opted in now and say, yes, I'm interested, I think it'd be a good thing. But I don't know if my neighbors are going to do it. And so it's not guaranteed for me anyway. So yes, I'm opting in, but then it comes down to how long do I have, once you have your pipe in place, for me to connect it to my house? Because one, what do I need to do? Do I need to get my own plumber? Do I need to get my own design, permits, whatever it is, go through the county and try to connect to my house? And then what if it doesn't work right away? And what if I can't afford it right away? I mean, there's just a basket load of questions here. So sorry to be the devil's advocate here, but I'm just trying to bring all this up because I think all you don't think about these things you don't have a property out here. You don't live through what we live through. And we've had to develop our own systems. And now I'm at the point where I have to put in a whole new system because my system needs updating. And now you're telling me it's not going to be till 2027. I'm going to say, I'm not really sure. I really don't know what to say. I'm not going to commit to $32,000 at this point in time, which inflation by 2027, give me the inflation rate at 2027 will be more like $100,000. Okay, so thank you.
Thanks, Bev. Yeah, I think I agree. There's a lot of questions. I think we should, we'll be available to try to set up smaller meetings or talk with folks one-on-one to answer questions, but let's now have Myra translate and then make sure other folks have time to ask questions.
All right. Thanks, John. Bueno, básicamente solo les quiero dejar saber que actualmente ya llegamos al fin de la junta. Ya son las 6:03, pero queremos ver si alguien más tiene alguna pregunta o comentario antes de cerrar la plática. Pero antes de hacer eso, nomás quiero traducir brevemente lo que acaba de decir Bev. Básicamente dijo que necesitamos tener otra junta comunitaria donde solo nos enfoquemos en obtener comentarios y preguntas y preocupaciones de la comunidad. Porque pues bueno, actualmente ella tiene muchas preguntas y no hay suficiente tiempo para responderle. Pero ¿hay alguien más que tenga alguna pregunta o duda?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I was wondering if we were to sign on with the Sunny Mesa and say we're interested, and then because that's going to be 3 years prior to the system being installed anyways, because of, you know, the way things work. If we were to decide in 3 years after we said we join and said, oh, either our situation changed or we were dead or something, you know, are we in trouble for not following through? Is the commitment that we're signing, the interest, the letter of interest, a legal document that holds us to the task of joining when in 4 or 3 or 5 or 10 or whenever it happens? Can we back out?
Thanks, Nancy. I think that's a really good question. I think that's actually something we'll need to follow up on about that to get you more detailed information on how binding of a commitment that is.
All right, and then I'll just translate quickly. Entonces, la pregunta de Nancy es que digamos que sí firman la carta y dicen que se quieren conectar al sistema de Springfield, pero por alguna razón en unos 2 o 3 años algo pasa y ya no se quieren conectar. Entonces, ¿qué pasaría? Y John respondió que vamos a tener que investigar un poco más sobre ese tema. Y bueno, también les quiero decir, bueno, que ya son las 6:05, pero sí tenemos un poco de más tiempo para ver si alguien más tiene alguna pregunta o un comentario. So it's 6:06. We just want to be, you know, conscious of everyone's time, but we can stay on to a few more minutes to see if there are any other questions or comments from the community. And again, if you want to ask a question, make sure you're not on mute. Si quieren hacer una pregunta o un comentario, quítense de silencio o de mute con estrella 6 o con el micrófono que se ve en la aplicación. Okay, so it seems like maybe someone's having technical issues, or maybe no one else has comments. But again, you can always call me, text me, email me to provide any questions, comments, or concerns that you may have. Si ya no hay comentarios del público, pero luego tienen una pregunta o un comentario adicional, pueden mandarme un mensaje o un correo electrónico, me pueden hablar. Mi número es el 831-500-2125 y mi correo electrónico es myra.hernandez@communitywatercenter.org. So again, my phone number is 831-500-2125, or you can email me at myra.hernandez@communitywatercenter.org. So before we end the meeting, Heather would like to say something. So antes de concluir la plática, Heather quiere compartir algo.
Thank you, Myra. First, I just wanted to thank everyone for their comments. I think you're already jumping to the next steps, and I think it's super helpful to have the comments saying, okay, how do we move from this alternatives analysis to moving forward with a recommended option? I think we've already been talking about that a lot, but you brought up really important things, I think, with all of the questions, and so we'll look into them. And we actually had a couple of the same questions ourselves, so I think we will work to get those answered, and then we'll be circling back with you at our next community meeting. Also, I know that Lisa and Richard and maybe also Steve Galvan, you all joined, and I will follow up with you next week one-on-one. I know we were scheduled to have a meeting, and so I will be connecting with you too. I know Myra is connecting with most everyone, but wanted to let you know, for those of you who I've been reaching out to, I'll be following up as well. And I really appreciate everyone joining and the excellent presentations too. So yeah, thank you.
Again, I just want to thank you for doing all this, and I appreciate you. I just really have a lot of major concerns. So don't, I'm sorry that I was short with a little bit of my questions, but we put a lot of money into our homes over here. Nancy, I know, was the other person to ask a question. This is a major investment for us, so we're not taking this lightly, and we need to understand everything before we commit to something like this. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. Y bueno, básicamente Heather solamente les quería dejar saber que estaba muy agradecida por todos los que atendieron el día de hoy, y está agradecida por todas las preguntas que nos hicieron el día de hoy y en el pasado también, y que vamos a estar trabajando para obtener respuestas a esas preguntas si no las tenemos actualmente. Y Bev acaba de comentar y dice que aprecia mucho el trabajo que estamos haciendo, y pidió disculpas si sonó un poco enojada anteriormente, pero pues es un asunto muy importante y es algo a lo que se le va a invertir mucho dinero, así que pues es algo que tiene que tomar con mucha seriedad. Y pues vamos a seguir para adelante trabajando con ustedes. So if there are no other questions, comments, or concerns, again, just a repeat of what Heather said. We thank you all very much for attending this meeting, and we will follow up with everyone individually And we look forward to continuing our conversations to really help you all attain a long-term solution that works for you to obtain safe and affordable drinking water. Entonces, muchas gracias a todos otra vez por venir a la plática de hoy y compartir su tiempo con con nosotros. Vamos a estar comunicándonos con todos ustedes otra vez para obtener esa retroalimentación, para ayudarles a obtener una solución de largo plazo para que todos ustedes puedan tener agua sana, limpia y económica. Entonces, con eso, muchas gracias. Thank you very much. I hope you all have a great rest of your evening, and we will be in touch.
Muchas gracias, Mayra, por todo lo que están haciendo por la comunidad. Soy María Martínez.
De nada, María. Gracias a usted.
Gracias. Adiós.
Adiós.
Thank you.
Thank you. Look forward to talking with you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.